Same thing on that one. You got the button on the back. It's
So we stop the button.
yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Great. Thank you
Have
so
a
much.
wonderful evening.
Thank you. Joe, how are you?
Good.
Haven't seen you in a long time and I really, really miss you.
Every time
Oh.
I'm reminded that it's the red, a smile comes to my face that I'm not there.
Why am I not surprised that you think of us with so much fondness and yet you're happy where you are?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So right now in this huge big auditorium space, Frederick is here, as is Deborah White. Do you remember Deborah? Her work is coming up shortly.
Hi, Deb.
Hi, Professor Nolan.
So she's coming up very soon, so be advised. That's a heads up for you. And Frederick's lovely wife Natasha is also here.
Hello, Dr. Nolan.
Hi, Natasha. How did you get victimized?
It was easy. I have a crush on the presenter.
She has a crush on the presenter, she says. That's so cute. That is so cute. So we're just waiting for Jim Henderson, and the minute he comes, we'll start. So you know the protocol. I have to read a little document that says, you know, officially this is Frederick's dissertation proposal, defense, and so on and so forth. And then the plan is that Frederick is going to present for 20 minutes. And after that, after he's done with his presentation, each one of us gets to ask him questions. And as you know, Joe, we've worked together for a long time. We've sent him all the little minutiae type questions in advance. So it's just the big issues that we'll be dealing with in case there are any at this point. And then we send Frederick out of the room while we deliberate. And after, when he comes back, we tell him, you know, the proceedings of the meeting. So I know how efficient you are, Joe, and how you like to keep things to the hour. So as soon as Jim Henderson comes, we can begin.
Yeah, hurry up and get him. The beat your weight.
I think he's in our class down there. I saw him.
Oh, he's in the class?
He's the class that we did, the women's.
Yeah.
He was sitting there.
Jim Henderson?
Because I went down to get some hot water, but they didn't have any, and I saw him sitting in front
Okay.
of the class. I
So-
don't know if they're having classes now?
No, it's 12, it's 11 o'clock. He knows to be here.
Yeah, okay.
Let me just go, because you know there was a change in the room. So I want to make sure that he knows.
Hey, Frederick, you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I am.
I gotta tell you experience I had. I was doing some research down at the University of Texas American History Art. And I had to go, they have news board of out of New York newspaper. So I went in there to look up because a lot of the stuff you have is archival information.
Right.
You're looking for that, you're up against.
Well, thank you. I will remember that and unload my phone so I can do the same thing.
You didn't bring any firearms, did you?
No, I left.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Yeah, I left.
I never want to assume.
Yeah, all of them.
Big black and baby black, right?
Yes, you remember.
I do, of course. This is one of my favorite shirts. Hi.
Hi, Natasha.
This is my wife.
Oh, you're, I'm sorry, your first name?
Natasha.
Saint Natasha. Okay, all right. Okay, I get it.
Only according to him.
Oh, there's Joe.
Yes. Do you want to come here and say hello to him?
Actually, I'm gonna go sit down.
And then we can start.
Okay.
Yes. Joe is ready to go to the beach, as he says.
Oh, you look good.
Dr. Nolan, I understand you're ready to go to the beach.
Okay, so we'll get this
What
started.
was that?
What was that, Joe? He keeps it nice and,
You just put this here? Camera, I don't know what that was.
Okay, so everything's fine, you can hear all of us, right, Joe? Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get this started. This is the first part of the defense is being recorded. When we have our deliberations among the faculty, that's when we will stop the recording. And we will switch it on again at the end when we tell you the results of this committee meeting. Okay, and Sheila Costello, our wonderful program administrator, tells us that there's a little short piece that I have to read, and so here it is. The purpose of the dissertation proposal meeting is to bring the dissertation committee together to evaluate the student's dissertation proposal. It is a working meeting so that the student can benefit from the committee's collective wisdom. We will begin with a 20-minute presentation by Frederick Faison, where he provides an overview of his project and perhaps note any particular concerns or questions or uncertainties where advice from the committee would be helpful. At the conclusion of the opening presentation, we will move into a more informal discussion phase where committee members in a round-robin fashion will ask questions, make suggestions, etc. until we are confident that everyone is on the same page and all concerns have been addressed. At this point, we will ask that is when the committee members have finished the questioning, we will ask Frederick to close, not to close the open session, but to leave the room so that the committee can move into an executive session to discuss among themselves, after which we will ask Frederick to re-enter the room and we will tell him the proceedings of the meeting. So any questions so far on the format or the process? Okay, in which case, Frederick, it's yours, and tell us what your proposal is all about, what you're proposing.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to, first of all, acknowledge how grateful and humble I am to be a part of this wonderful Union Institute and University. I want to acknowledge as well and give thanks for Dr. Mitra, our chair, Dr. James Henderson, and Dr. Nolan, who all have played a part. I guess where I wanted to start was my first, I've revisited, this is my second time being in Ohio for a residency, but I remember that first residency. And in that first residency where I met my cohort, Eric, and all of the other members, Sandra and Ebony, where we met together, it was just an eye-opening experience to be put in a cohort where we could learn together in community. And vividly, I remember when we had to take a trip to the museum, and there we would meet this famous Dr. Mitra, And I remember going online when I was looking about if I would consider Union. One of the main videos that was on YouTube was them talking about learning to look. And that process, when we met Dr. Mitra, we went into the museum. We saw all of these wonderful artworks where we just casually just glanced by it first. And she tells the group, let's go back. Let's look. And there were chairs, and we just continued to just look and gaze and look and gaze. And it was a learning process that would help me now as a evolving researcher. It is learning again to look at the research. It is learning to look and see new opportunities where we can improve and to become. And I think that initial visit to the museum is an inspiration for us that we need now in times like these, to learn to look and to see where we can resolve some of our problems that we are witnessing even today. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be given the tools to learn how to look from Dr. Henderson, Dr. Nolan, Dr. Caraway, Dr. Mitra. And so I've been looking, and this is what I have seen. For my research, I'm inspired as the 9th chaplain of Lincoln University. I've been learning and looking, and this is my area of interest, to understand the role and the relevancy of the historical Black college and university chaplains. And I'm really excited about it. We want to see how we can, okay, there we go. Immediately when I began researching, and I ran into all of these different studies, I was quite surprised from 1954 to 2008 that these were the basic studies that have been done about the American chaplaincy. And that surprised me because that's just from 1954 to 2008. But these are just the basic studies. But it was very interesting to learn that the first chaplaincy in America was happened in 1775 at Yale University. And from 1775 to 1904, it was said that there was only 14 chaplaincies. And then when we enter the 20th century in America, there is a proliferation of chaplaincies that happen on higher education campuses. There was one major reason was after World War I and World War II that there was this movement to try to get those persons returning from world wars to come back to higher education and to develop themselves and to support them as they were navigating through all of these different American institutions. Now, the interesting thing that I learned about all of these American institutions, all of them in one way or another were connected with a religious organization that was started. And so the challenge of these institutions was, how do we honor our legacy? How do we honor our history? But then how do we become more globally aware and to be responsive to the international student and to create an environment where we all can learn together and grow together. So as I looked at all of these particular studies, none of them addressed HBCU chaplaincies. And so as an introduction, I just wanted to give a historical overview of the role of the chaplaincy that I just tried to speak to, that chaplain's role was working in the midst of the history, in the midst of helping to bring a community together, and the present and future relevance of the chaplain is also my concern, that understanding specifically what is that role in the changing landscape of education, the dynamic of the 21st century student. So there are a number of nuances that I encountered when I was looking over the research that still gives a wonderful introduction for a needed inquiry. Problem statement. Here's one of the problem statements in general, just of the American chaplaincy. If the traditional roles within the university no longer define the chaplaincy, because everything is changing, then what is the contribution of the chaplain now and in the future? I thought it was also interesting that our chaplains, is their main role just to care for the lost, emotionally fragile, or those students that are in crisis, or to shepherd a religious diverse campus. And that is true. A part of my work and a part of the work of chaplains is doing those things, but is that the sole responsibility now? And how do chaplains sustain and deepen their own religious and spiritual commitments while caring for others? I am a caretaker. I care about people. We have 426 acres at Lincoln University, and I'm not just relegated to the chapel. I feel the campus is my parish, and I'm at football games, and I'm everywhere. Coronations, I just feel that I need to be there as chaplain. But my work, of course, that I've learned, one of the questions is, how do we refurbish our own spirit as caretakers? And then finally, as mentors, how do chaplains support the challenge to challenge the next generation of global citizens? And so those are some of the problems that are before us. And so this launches us to our purpose. The purpose, the study and aim is to review the current literature in contemporary academic chaplaincy, and to evaluate and build upon suggestions and methods of HBCU chaplaincies, and to make recommendations of a flexible and adaptable model. So those are the things that I'm concerned about. And the need, of course, the goal is to develop a comprehensive approach for viewing religious life at HBCUs. I was this larger American chaplaincy, but now we're moving to specifically what is the HBCU chaplaincy, the historically black college and university chaplaincy. And that is that need that it's not only an impoverished kind of research of chaplaincy in general, but specifically the HBCU chaplaincy. So I'm interested in that. The literature shares some broad issues that I encountered. Of course, I did a review of the chaplain history narrative in higher education from Yale, 1775 to 1904, then the World Wars I and II, and then the movement. So that was that challenge. Little research. One researcher says that it's the longest kind of profession that's still in its infancy, because it really just did not start, believe it or not, until to really get up and running until the 20th century. And the other thing that I encountered, not only the problems with history, but there were 3 higher education chaplaincy models, and this was interesting to me. One administrative model is that the chaplain reported to the president, because in that instance, it was to say that the chaplain was supposed to be the spiritual advisor to the president. And even historically, believe it or not, the chaplain and the president actually acted together. And in universities, believe it or not, it was actually the president who gave the messages, but it was the chaplain who attended to the spiritual life. But that role has changed, where the president now, where in one model that the chaplain reports to the president. A newer model is the chaplain no longer reports to the president, because presidents don't stay at universities this long. And so now the chaplain is bequeathed to hold the history and to be the person who understands the mission and the history, and to communicate and orient the new president, and to be a part of that kind of agency to say, this is what we've realized, this is what we have done in the past, and should inform our work in the future. So, but the chaplain reports in that second model to the Vice President of Student Affairs. So, because the president's so busy now raising monies outside, well, I'm sorry, let me move on. So the chaplain reports to the Student Affairs Director, but then a third model is the chaplain reports to the Student Affairs Director and also to the Dean of Students. And that suggests that the chaplain has such an array from the administrative to being a colleague, a part of the Student Affairs Department, and also being connected to the Dean of Students. And that also revealed the need to research this. So who do you report to? Who, you know, so it's just really interesting to see that administratively. This brings us to changes in the ideology of the HBCU chaplaincy. And I just want to just click on and go. We see that for nearly 100 years after the Civil War, HBCU served as the only option for blacks. And in order to understand the HBCU chaplaincy, you have to understand what the HBCU means. I was just elated that two of the oldest HBCUs, Cheyney University, founded in 1837, and Lincoln University, where I serve, that was founded in 1854, are in Pennsylvania. But the other reason why I knew Union was right for me is because it has this magnanimous history, and as well as Wilberforce University being a stone's throw away from us, should we say. But these kinds of universities were so impactful and have helped. In 1890, there were over 200 HBCUs. By 1960s, I put this here because I ran up on something so interesting, specifically Dr. Nolan. I thought this would be of interest to you. I ran up on that in the 1960s, there was something that happened to all of the American universities. During this civil rights period, that there was all of this change, the 50s and the 60s. Remember now, there was this major change with American universities, World War I, World War II, but there was another major movement because of the civil rights movement. And now, so black students were not just relegated to going to black institutions, but it opened the opportunity for them to go to other institutions. And this was another increase in chaplaincies that happened to say, okay, we have another diversity coming and we need to see how we're going to handle that. One unique thing that I learned is that that was also the time that there was a shift from being spiritually centered in higher education to student-centered. And when they went from being spiritually centered, the chaplains were actually responsible at these former religious institutions for managing student life, counseling, so they were in the middle of all of those campuses. But when they switched the focus from a spiritually centered to a student-centered, they moved the counseling department from the chaplaincy and created the counseling. They moved the counseling from the chaplaincy and created a counseling department. They moved the student activities from the chaplaincy and created a student's activity department. So I thought that that was a very interesting phenomenon that deserved mention because in American education, there was a movement from the spiritual to student-centered. 1972, there was this great movement for all of these HBCUs to come together in a coalition so that they could survive. And today, there are 103 HBCUs remaining. And so the research method for all of this is that I am desirous of using a qualitative descriptive case study, using semi-structured, in-depth interviews, and document analysis. So that's what I want to do. Research questions. Here are those 3 questions. What are the best practices for chaplaincy programs? as represented in academic literature. What does the literature say? What are the best practice programs as represented that's being implemented from the literature at HBCUs? And then thirdly, how is the role of the chaplaincy program at Lincoln University structure? I put that there because I want from all of this stuff that I see from my looking, I want to inculcate in my own work there at Lincoln. The instrument that I am going to use will include inquiry about demographics, age, gender, race, position held. I even want to know about the housing status. I just moved on campus myself, and what have happened to the college campuses, there's been a devastation of just the college campus community where professors and the chaplains lived on campus. But I'm interested now at these other institutions that, does the chaplain, is he on campus? Is he available? I want to know about the mission and the denomination, the student populace. I also want to know about, are they a 9-month, 10-month, or 12-month employee? The professional training, what type of administrative support? And then, of course, the programs and services. So that instrument will reflect all of that. Here are my assumptions. People are in need of a holistic development regardless of religious and non-religious beliefs. And I believe that the chaplaincy can help to realize that. Here's my second assumption. Of the 7 chaplains I'm hoping to interview, I believe that it will be a useful tool in creating a flexible model to update the mission statement at Lincoln and to perhaps be a resource for others. The delimitations, the literature of the HBCU chaplaincy is lacking, and I have a relatively small survey size for these 7 peer chaplains from the same size university as Lincoln, and it's not representative of the larger HBCUs. And missing from the limitations, missing from the mid-century studies of campus ministry, spirituality has become a central focus of the American chaplaincy. So it no longer matters if I'm Protestant or you're Catholic or if you are Hindu or Muslim, that there has to be some kind of way for us as chaplains to adapt to this spiritual understanding. What can we do to build bridges so that we can connect the campus? And the last point, chaplains are expected to work within a myriad of languages, cultures, and beliefs, and often beyond those of the formation of skills. So it is an incredible work. And here's some things for future study. Although HBCUs recently have grown in research as an interest of research, but it's the HBCU chaplaincy has not been explored. And I want to know more about what are the pathways to the HBCU chaplaincy. I mean, just a simple perusal on highered.com, you can look under the religious job descriptions, and there's so many things that each one of them require. And you wonder what kind of preparation to be a HBCU chaplain or a university chaplain in general. What ways will work for chaplains that they need to adjust for the position to survive? And what is the future of the college chaplaincy? So these are my interests. This is what I have looked and learned, and I'm hopeful to research. So again, I'm grateful to each one of you on the committee for helping me to learn how to look and listen and to see. And I'm hoping that my research will be a credit and add some contribution. Thank you. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Joe, can you hear us from far away? Do we need to get closer? Yeah.
Do I remain?
Yeah.
Yes.
You should be on camera.
Okay,
Yes.
I should be okay.
Well, that was a great presentation, Frederick. Thank you so much. So now we will open up the floor for questions. And I'm wondering if Joe would like, Dr. Nolan would like to go first, followed by Dr. Henderson, and then I'll go last. Does that sound like a plan, Joe? Okay.
I really have no questions, I just comment. Frederick, we worked since 786, so I've seen several iterations. I want to comment, it's really come a long way.
Thank you,
Yes.
thank you.
So basically, I have no questions. I gave you my comments, you addressed.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nolan. I'll ask Dr. Henderson to go next, and then we can go down the road. Yeah?
Do I need to get on camera?
I think so, because otherwise, the speaker is right here.
Okay. Why don't you come back and then I'll be with you. You like my shirt, Joe, I know. No, I'm a sick boy. One of the things that you said in towards the end of your comments, Frederick, is these are other things you would like to know. I'm assuming, but I want you to correct the assumption if it's not right. I'm assuming that these matters will appear in Chapter 5 in implications for future study. You're not going to address these in your current study.
No, I'm not. That's what I'm just going to leave for future study.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
I was assuming that, but I wanted to make it explicit because we don't want to enter into a contract with you, which is the dissertation proposal, that has you studying these things as well.
Oh, no.
So, okay. Your presentation raised something in my mind that I apologize for not asking you. Are there, of the 7 participants, I actually have 2 questions regarding that. Why 7? And are there any women in the 7, or are there women generally in chaplaincies?
Yes, there are. Of course, why 7, that was the number that I discussed with Dr. Caraway about. He thought that would be a good number because initially I had thought of 3, but he said 7 would be a good number. And so that's how we landed at 7. And I have a list of people that from who I know, who I want to be included, and most certainly there are women chaplains, but you know, we want to also, yeah, there will be some, hopefully, that will accept the invitation and participate. Yes.
And again, I want you to bust my assumption. I'm assuming that most of the subjects will be Christian chaplains. Or no?
Maybe not.
Cool.
Maybe not,
Okay.
because they are, just because they operate in the role as a university chaplain does not relegate that they are Christian.
Frankly, just a brief commentary. I think having non-Christian chaplains would add richness to your study.
Right.
But the last one is a more esoteric question, and I'll encourage you to wax eloquent. And I know you're a humble young man. How do you see this study advancing your legacy?
How do I see this study advancing my legacy? It's a great question, and if you permit me to answer it, at Lincoln's chaplain, at Lincoln's, as Lincoln's chaplain, I've been there for 7 years, and Lincoln's motto is advancing the legacy. And so I specifically was inspired to create this mantra for the chapel that we are living the legacy life. And we do it through three capacities. We're intentional about being relational. We participate in a concert of care. And we advance the legacy through character, leadership, and service. So this particular study will aid me in that quest to, first of all, share with my colleagues just some of the things that I've learned that can help them. And so I think that that will promote that legacy. But it will also promote the legacy of Lincoln that started as a seminary, that started in the middle of a country that was war-torn from the Civil War and still trying to reconcile even what to do with this nation's sons that were black, and still trying to bring into conversation issues just as we see in 2016 to this day. So I'm hoping that I will be one who will be a tour guide and to call people and to look at the art and to say, let's look at this again. Let's look and see what we can do again. That's the
Did I
best.
set you up okay with that?
You did well.
All right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And I'll get back in the seat just for Joe's sake. So Frederick, I want to say that you've done a very, very strong proposal. You really cleaned it up. You focused with so much discipline and rigor. And I'm really looking forward to the interviews that you will do with the 7 chaplains, and then how you will get the summation from those interviews to create a path that will really go forward, because these are such complex times, as you know, I mean, with Dallas and with Minnesota and with all kinds of crazy things happening all over. You know, the role of the chaplain is to also bring about some level of calm, some level of certainty, where there are, you know, there is no certainty in this world, but your role asks you to lead with some kind of optimism. So I think it's not only a study of chaplaincy, but it's a study of activism and social justice and leadership. And you have such a great opportunity to bring all this together in a very important way, because there is very little literature, as we know. So that is one of the things that you'll be facing. You'll be working without too much literature, and you're the one who has to write it. So that's a responsibility and a burden and an opportunity, and you have to live that mandate.
Wow, the pressure.
So no questions from my end. So then, Joe, we're going to ask Frederick and Natasha and Deborah to give us a little bit of privacy, and then we will get to Gordon back.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. And at this point, I'll also stop the report.
All right.
There. Yes.
And then I'll stop it over here as well.